Hi, I'm Deborah Chow, and I'm the director and executive producer of Obi-Wan Kenobi. We're watching episode 6, which is the finale of the show. So episode 6, this is what we were building to the whole time.
If we cannot break the
So episode 6 was incredibly exciting to film just because we were finally getting to all these pivotal moments and these iconic moments with these characters. But it was also, it's intense. You're trying to hand off to a new hope, and we're trying to close these huge storylines. Episode 6, in essence, was what this show was about. I think for all of us involved, one of the most pivotal moments that we were obviously building to was the scene between Ewan and Hayden with the cracked mask. But so many of the storylines and the character arcs that were concluding in this episode, everything that was set here, was everything we've been building to through the entire series.
To live, don't you think?
Actually, I was very excited when we got to do all the droids, and I used some of the Mandalorian droids in there. So for us coming back to Tatooine, having the storyline come full circle, and Reva coming back to Tatooine and bringing this back to Luke and the Lars farm was very satisfying to get to in episode 6 and to have all these storylines finally start to come together.
Something you want to say?
I have something to say.
Wait your turn. You can have what's left when I'm done.
And so much about this show thematically was about so many of these characters dealing with the weight of the guilt or the loss or sort of the trauma of what had come out of Order 66. And obviously Reva's character, portrayed by Moses Ingram, was pivotal to that journey as well.
Owen.
So for much of these sequences and sort of this, back and forth between Obi-Wan and Vader, we were really trying to hone this in that this is personal now. This is not just, dark side, light side. This is two men that have a very long history together. And this is personal for Vader. And he's not making judgments that may be the best or in the best interest of the Empire. But this is all about their personal feelings towards each other. For me, I always loved this dynamic between O'Shea and Ewan. I thought that they always worked really well together. And we were so fortunate to have O'Shea in the show. I just feel like he brings such a warmth and a humanity to the character.
Motivators.
When we were first developing this and kind of getting into this idea of the path, and characters like Roken or Maya Erskine's character, getting into this where they're trying to help people, we were thinking a lot about obviously underground railways and people trying to help people get to safety and survival. Obviously there's, early precursor feeling here to the rebellion, but for us, we didn't want to get into rebellion territory or start doing any of the formation. So thematically, a lot of this is about, the handoff to the next generation and, what they're fighting for. I think for me, this is one of the things that always made the character of Obi-Wan so special is he has a warmth and a humanity and just sort of a kindness in him that it just makes him such a sort of an amazing character. So we're coming full circle now, and we're returning to Anchorhead. where we started obviously in episode 1. You know, and Anchorhead was something that it was exciting to get to do it because, you know, it's been part of the canon for so long, but we got to show a little bit more of it here. So for the most part, we were fortunate that we were able to shoot these episodes in large part in sequence. Some of them, you know, we did have to go out of sequence in some points, but one of the biggest advantages of that was the relationship between Obi-Wan and Leia that, you know, started kind of contentiously, and they had a lot of conflict at the beginning. That, you know, both the actors, both Vivian and Ewan, had kind of started like that. They had started as strangers. And so by the time we got to this episode, you can feel it now. You can feel the bond between them because now they've been shooting together for 6 months and they've spent so much time together that bond, not just as characters, but also as, you know, as people, had developed over the course of shooting through the show. So I was so glad that we were able to shoot so many of these pivotal scenes between them and these sort of goodbye scenes at the end because they really did have an emotional bond at this point. One of the things that's amazing between Kumail and Maya and O'Shea, we had such a wealth of comedic talent, and we so did not put it to use in this scene. They're all basically crying and upset in this scene. But on set, it was very fun.
Liar and a fake Jedi may not mean much to you. It's good enough for me.
And so much of what's going on here is, you know, the journey of sort of Obi-Wan coming back into himself and who he is that this is him, you know, standing up again. He's becoming the general, and he is becoming himself again. One of the things I really loved about getting to do these Lars Farm scenes is that, you know, we were so lucky to get Bonnie and Joel to come back and reprise these roles, and, you know, to get these people that had done it like 17 years ago and then bring them back together was amazing. But I also loved the idea that we would get to have both of them together as a partnership, and that Brew was going to kick some ass, and that, you know, Joel was going to get out there. It was really nice to be able to do that, to show kind of the depth of this relationship a little bit more. So anything with the Lars Farm is Anchorhead.
What are you doing?
The only time they ever go to Mos Eisley is in the pilot, when Ewan at the very end of the episode goes to take the spaceport because he had to go to the bigger city to take the transport. Everything else is Anchorhead. So this scene is, you know, in large part such a testament to these two actors. You know, for Vivian to be this young of an actor and to be able to convey so much emotion in this, and Ewan as well, obviously. This was a very special scene, and it was actually quite moving when we were shooting it. The emotion between these two felt very real. This moment where Obi-Wan hands Tala's belt to Leia, this was something that, you know, obviously was a moment that was in respect and deference to the sacrifice that Tala's character had made, and then Indira played so beautifully. And also, you know, we were really trying with the character of Tala to show that she was one of the formative influences, you know, one of many, on showing Leia another way to be, and, you know, what people fighting for things that are good and being exposed to things like death and in politics at such a young age. And that legacy is sort of wrapped up in him giving this to her. I have to give all the credit to the props department, as I remember that when we were doing, when we were designing and trying to figure out, you know, what Tala's belt, that holder looked like and whatnot, you know, and all the marks inside. One of the prop people, actually, it was her suggestion to go, why doesn't that be the holder for Lola at the end? And it was kind of genius. And so then we kind of designed it to make sure it could hold both the blaster and Lola. So much of this episode, too, it's the music is just amazing between John Williams and Bill Ross and Natalie. We were so lucky with the music.
This ends today.
I feel like they gave us such an emotional core to it, but it was also quite epic. You know, so this decision on Ewan's part, this is, you know, for us as we were developing the show, this is really what the show was about, is that He's spent the last 10 years living with all this guilt and this trauma and sort of trying to run from this. And, he's finally going to face it. And I should also say for all these scenes on the ship that, a big shout out to our special effects team, because there were a lot of our special effects team and also our sound mixer, Julian, who was doing sound effects to help the actors. And there were people like with fishing wire trying to shake all these things every time the ship was supposed to get hit. So it was really kind of fun. There was a lot of things moving and shaking throughout these scenes. So as the show developed over the 6 episodes, a big part of what we were trying to do with Vader's character is that, whatever's left of Anakin or what is still focused on this sort of personal emotion or the anger and the vendetta, as the show goes on, it's getting stronger and stronger because of Obi-Wan. And at this point, he's, the comparison between the Grand Inquisitor, what his priorities are and what Vader's priorities are very clear here. And Vader this is a personal fight that he's chasing. It's funny, between Mandalorian and Obi-Wan, I have looked at like every space shot that has basically of, how to move ships through space, from how it's been done through all of Star Wars, and looked at other shows as well. And doing those shots I find it really interesting because it's like, there's so many things where you're touching on things that have been done iconically before. At the same time, you're trying to do something that's new. But obviously for us, because of our connection to the original trilogy and wanting to have that feel somewhat seamless and organic, that this wouldn't feel like, that it was so far off base for where it goes after this, we definitely did look a lot at what was done in the original trilogy. And the Inquisitors obviously are coming from Dave Filoni's animated series and whatnot. And I was fortunate enough to, because obviously Dave and I had worked on Mandalorian together, and so I was talking to him all the time and making sure that he was part of the whole thing. But for us, it was exciting to get to do them for the first time in live action. One of the things I think that becomes very clear when you start working on a project that does have Vader in it is that less is more. And that when you overuse him, you almost start ruining the character. So it was very helpful, frankly, to have another set of antagonists that could be sort of in there really fighting and chasing. And, that we're also connected and coming straight out of the orders of Order 66 and so many of the things that we were already thematically exploring. A lot of the development that had gone into the Barren Moon, which is, where the fight was staged, is that we wanted somewhere that was very evocative and it was very moody, but also that would provide kind of this simple but sort of very primal backdrop to them. This is not somewhere where we wanted it to be crazy busy, because it really was about these two men and this fight. So we're looking to really design something that was very atmospheric, but that had a scale to it and a scope to it that was very powerful. And so Doug did this wonderful concept art. So, we were really so lucky to have him to sort of visualize this world. Vader was a character that, for me, I was so fortunate that I had done Mandalorian before this, because having had that experience of working with a character that is fully masked and having to really learn that, everything emotionally and the inner life has to be conveyed by these small gestures, and how to move the helmet, how, just even like how they hold their body, and like the smallest little gesture, the way they breathe is the way you're trying to communicate emotion. And so having done that with Mandalorian and then coming in to Vader, it was incredibly helpful because, Vader he's such an incredibly iconic character, and it's amazing how wrong that can go so quickly. So we spent a lot of time just making sure that the walk felt right, that the costume was hanging right, that, just even how how we shot it and how the mask and how all the components work together. And I will say, as a testament to all the performers, it is not easy wearing that costume. So one of the things in writing the dialogue, especially, with these two characters, is that we didn't want to become too referential where we're literally quoting back lines of dialogue. So there are obviously moments where we are referring to it or making a touchstone to it, but we were really trying not to do it unless it really felt genuine or the character really had something to say with it, that there was a second meaning, a new meaning in this show by reusing and saying the same line again. So this fight is obviously, one of the biggest pivotal moments in the show. And it's something that, we put a lot of energy and time into. And this was the heart in many ways of this show. So I had a great stunt coordinator named Jojo Asubio, and we started right from the beginning, trying to work on the choreography for this. We also had to obviously train these actors because, they are doing their own stunts. Like Ewan is 98%. That is him doing this. This is not stunt people doing these. So we also needed to train him before we started shooting because he was shooting it almost every day. So it's not like he would have a ton of time to go off and learn all this elaborate choreography. So we started working on that sort of even before we started shooting, and the stunt team was very vigilant in training and helping these actors get there. But when we first started shooting that fight, it was so satisfying. It was also so satisfying to finally see Obi-Wan stepping up again and sort of having regained his power, because, it was having done the show and trying to bring him out of, where he started when he was sort of weak and not feeling the force and dealing with so much trauma and guilt from what had happened, and then sort of gradually bringing him back. It was very gratifying to finally get him to be strong again and be standing up. We'll say editorially, this was very challenging cutting between these two storylines because the tempo was so different, and you're trying to keep the energy of a fight like this going. And then we'd have to kind of cut to these more sneaky things. So this was really like a huge debt to the editors for kind of going through this for so many months and trying to figure this out. The feeling that we were really trying to go with this fight is that we wanted this to feel real and to feel like they were really doing it, which they truly were, and to feel sort of emotional and personal, but also kind of brutal. That these two, for me, I'd always, these two are very evenly matched, and that's there. I don't think there is anybody else that would have a chance with either of them. So this is like watching two titans finally going at it. So much of what we were trying to design, and we really designed this fight from a narrative and emotional point of view, where we were looking at it like, okay, who's got the upper hand here? And it was a lot about the power struggle between the two of them, and then also the nature of how these two fight, that they have different styles, even though they've been trained the same way in many ways. Vader obviously has the high ground, which we didn't want him to say, but he does indeed have it, and we were thinking that. Shooting on stagecraft, and in large part shooting scenes that have a complexity like this, we really forces the different departments to work together. And so we would have art department and going, okay, we're going to blow this pillar up, or one of them's going to slam into it. And then we're working with special effects to go, we need an explosion here. And so we really tried to, frankly, to explode as much stuff as possible practically. I always find that it looks better, and it brings something to the scene, I think, for the actors and everybody working on it, where it feels real. Like all of a sudden, you're getting the actual explosion in front of you. So we would try to do as many practical effects throughout the fight as possible. And then this is all augmented by both stagecraft and by ILM and by all the visual effects. So it's sort of all working together, but the basis of it was definitely trying to lay it all down with the practical effects. So for us, it was really interesting getting to develop sort of more with Owen and Baru, and really, we kind of always loved the line where he says, "He is my own." And, you see that parental love, and that, his uncle truly did love him, and that he was there trying to protect him, despite all the arguments they would have later on. One of the biggest surprises I had when we first, obviously we spent a lot of energy trying to recreate the Lars farm in detail, and we had the original plan. We were really trying to be as accurate as possible. But one of the first things that when you first walked onto it, it was a little surprising because it's smaller than you expect it's going to be. And then, as you start to adjust to it and you realize, obviously so much of it is below and subterranean, but it is, so many of the experiences of this show of having the first time you walk on and you're like standing on the Lars farm. It's crazy just to be on these sets that you're so familiar with. So much of what was going on in this scene is we're obviously trying to find a way to sort of articulate, like, that he's lost his clarity, that he's got to reconnect, and he's trying to get that clarity of mind to be able to connect properly to the Force. So much of that is now about these kids, and it's about the future. So we obviously shot, a lot of these fight scenes over many days. But what was amazing is, we sort of broke it into smaller sections. Is that, they were truly doing this. They were really performing this, and the lightsabers, that is the real light from them. And, I can't even tell you how many lightsabers we broke from the force of them fighting throughout this, because they are really doing this. We also, whenever we did a fight scene or we did anything that didn't have, too much dialogue in it, we would always play music. And so we played a lot of music, John Williams, of course, just to get the energy up. And so the entire time we were shooting the Vader and Obi-Wan fight, we had music just blasting. I find it makes such a difference on set. Like, you can feel it all of a sudden, especially with something like Star Wars, because the music's always been so essential to it. So this was something that, Jojo and I had talked about, and, I'd always kind of wondered why nobody, when they tried to fight Vader, ever went for his box. And so this is something we really wanted Obi-Wan to go for, to start realizing that he's essentially got a life support system, and this is the way you could actually destroy him. When we were shooting this, frankly, it was kind of shocking, but it was also so satisfying. So this scene is, for me, I think, is the heart and the soul of the entire show. And this was a very difficult scene to try to write and to try to conceive of. And obviously there's so many touchstones to iconic moments, both in the live action and the animation.
Anakin's gone.
The day that we shot this, for me, I think it's one of the most remarkable memories that I have of shooting this entire show. There was something about the energy of this day that, for Ewan and Hayden, this is not feigned, like they have a personal relationship. They've known each other. And coming to do this scene, there's just something special. Like every so often as a director, you see this happen on set and it's just sort of amazing. And so this emotion between them, like it was real. It was genuine. And so there was something so incredibly sad and tragic while this was shooting, but also so moving. And, I just remember coming out, and it was pin quiet when we were shooting this. And I remember coming out to go somewhere offset, and I hadn't been off in a while. And I saw all these people from the crew and from the office that aren't normally on set, and they were all sitting down, and they put blankets down, and they were sitting in like all across the studio floor watching the monitors, just watching as we shot it. And everybody was just so sort of quiet and just sort of so, the tears in people's eyes. I remember the camera operators trying to shoot these close-ups, and, they're crying trying to shoot it.
And my friend is truly dead.
One of the things that also was amazing is, these lightsabers and the lighting, that's going across their faces, particularly obviously on Hayden. This was not put in post. This was really happening. And just the way they were using those lightsabers and the lighting effects, it was so reflective of what they were doing emotionally. And so his face, like in this moment, that is just what Hayden is doing with that saber. And, you can really feel sort of the shift with it. That scene to me too is such a testament to the actors. I mean, for all the bells and whistles, for all the planets, for everything that goes into Star Wars to try to make it amazing and have a huge scope. At the end of the day, I think for me, the most important thing that this show is about is literally the close-ups between Ewan and Hayden. And they are the people that made this show what it is. One of the things that was obviously one of the most significant things that we knew we were going to be doing in this scene was the audio and how we were going to blend Anakin's voice and Vader and how we were going to, work that and how that was going to work. So right from the beginning, it was always planned that it would be sort of a mixture of in broken bits between the two of them. So the way we did it is that on set, Hayden did perform, and he performed it as is. And so we just let him, kind of do it emotionally. I wasn't telling him to try to, do Vader at the same time, but it really just be himself and just, perform it as organically and naturally as he could, which he definitely did. And then, then I would work with Matt Wood and Sky Sound, and, we're obviously very fortunate to have them, because they've done Vader for so long, to work on developing that and putting that together with, the Vader voice. So, with Reva's storyline and the culmination of her coming to here, obviously we're going into her past and her trauma. And this is something where, we knew Obi-Wan was going to obviously have to get there and get back to Tatooine. But we didn't want him to kind of come in and save the day for this. We wanted this to be a decision that was made by Reva, for better or for worse, that this was going to be this character's own decision as to where her life would go and the choices she would make. And it was such an interesting parallel that we were obviously trying to develop, just to, the significance of how Order 66 and Anakin's turn to the dark side, how it affected so many lives and so many people, and, down to his children, from Obi-Wan to Reva, that almost every character in this, their life was changed by these decisions. This is one of the few scenes where we get to have, these four characters together. And it's always interesting, especially this was shot very near to the end of the production. And it's always interesting because there's actors who don't get to be in the same scene, and then to have them all together in one scene, it's always kind of a nice thing to get to do that at the end. I think, one of the challenges that, for Moses in playing this character is that, we knew that this is where the character was going, and she has such a secret that she's hiding throughout. that it was trying to make sure that this sort of emotional side was there throughout. And I think Moses did a great job with that. And one of the remarkable things about coming back to the show, and especially with characters that are all returning, is the ease of which, how so many of these actors either stepped back into these roles. So for me, as a director, it's just amazing. Like, Joel had not played this character in ages, and then, just walks right back into it. Same with Ewan. And then there were people like Ian, who, obviously has been playing this character, and it's fresher to them, and, it's part of their life, and they've lived with it for years. And just, you turn the camera on, and there's the Emperor, and there's Palpatine, and it's just coming right out. It's amazing. So in a lot of ways, when we were developing this scene, obviously the parallel between these two, they both had their lives impacted in a huge way by Anakin and the choices that he's made. And so much of, where you are in life and who you are as a person is dependent on how you react to those choices.
No. You've chosen.
So in large part, Reva's character had developed, she'd gone through so much trauma at such a young age at his hands. It was really about like how she dealt with it. So for us, I think for her future, we didn't want her to. It's hard, you're not going to turn overnight and all of a sudden be a paragon of goodness or light. We just wanted her to get to the point where she's making a choice not to be that. And her choices would now be her own, as defined by what she wanted to do rather than being defined by wanting revenge or in retaliation to him.
We will destroy.
So with this scene, it was very exciting to have Ian McDiarmid and to be able to have Emperor Palpatine in it. But really, for us, the point of this was that this is the turn that he was so focused on his own personal vendetta and his pursuit of Obi-Wan, and it's the Emperor's like yanking his leash back, kind of reminding him that he's going to make a choice here.
Perhaps your feelings for your old master have left you weakened. If your past cannot be overcome.
So much of how he just moves that mask and, just the mere fact of like having him sit back and how he's breathing, we worked a great deal on just trying to develop that body language and in correlation to what's been done before to define him. And this, obviously, finally using this music that was so pivotal, it was a choice. We had originally started temping the show using a lot more of the original music, but what we found is that he wasn't the same Vader as A New Hope. And so for us to start using it in moments before he'd gotten there, we just wanted to be very careful that we weren't going to dilute what came later and what he became. How these people like Doug Chang that, he worked on the prequels. So for us coming into Obi-Wan, it was remarkable having someone that had worked with George and had talked with him and knew the original syncing between behind things like the planet of Alderaan. Like, what was that based on? What were the references for that? So the concept art, it was incredibly pivotal for this show, especially because we were going back to so many things that were originally George's ideas, or planets or locations that, maybe they had existed like Alderaan, but that you hadn't seen much of. So it was incredibly helpful to have this concept art. And then it also, like, one thing I found on both Mandalorian and Obi-Wan is that working with someone like Doug is that I would find that he would tend to always concept the most iconic moments of whatever the scene is. And in doing so, he would literally find the heart of what that scene was about. This was one of my favorite dynamics that was sort of unexpected, and I didn't know how this would turn out. But just seeing Jimmy with Vivian was such a lovely sort of father-daughter dynamic. And was also getting to see Jimmy's character from such a different point of view. And this was definitely one of the last scenes we shot between these two. So there's also kind of the sadness of, oh, the show's ending. And, so a lot of these goodbyes were starting to get real, where the actors were starting to say goodbye to each other after this long journey together. So what's amazing is that, Leia's very young, actually, in A New Hope. And that, she was off to university and senatorial school very young. So, for us, we really had to get her on this journey. Even though she's only 10 in the show, she's very advanced by the time she gets to A New Hope. So we really needed to make sure that the building blocks were there. So this scene was something obviously in development, that, this is us trying to thread a needle very delicately here, where there's obviously the character, and we're closing this journey between these two, but there's a real handoff obviously going off to A New Hope, both with Jimmy's character and talking about the rebellion and the seeds of what will come. And then also, we knew right from the beginning that obviously we had to address, and we would have to deal with this idea of, Leia, did these two know each other, and what came in A New Hope? So, we put a great deal of thought into how to do this scene.
I don't know.
One of the things I think that was the nicest is just shooting this is that the dynamic between Ewan and Vivian was just so lovely. It was so warm, and it was just so sweet.
Right.
This ended up being one of my favorite scenes in the show. And I think this speech, we were trying to acknowledge Padme in large part in the debt. And it's just such it's just such an emotional feeling of everything they've been through, but like all the characteristics of both Anakin and Padme combining in her.
You are wise.
And that's something that we really wanted to acknowledge, that over the course of this journey with Obi-Wan, that she's come back with a greater appreciation for her parents.
These are qualities that came from your mother. You're also
right from the outset, we knew that we were going to have a droid and a toy for Leia, and then it turned out then when Vivian came to set that she was completely bananas for droids. And every time I would lose her on set, like when there were too many extras and I couldn't find her to go notes, all I would do was look for the droid, and there would be Vivian. So it was kind of a good pairing. But the droid and the toy of Lola was something that was really fun to design, and it was designed by Doug Chang, and it was meant to be. One, it's a dual function where, it is a companion, and it's with her kind of as a toy, but it was also a little Swiss Army knife, and it was also sort of protecting her in a lot of ways. So it was something that was kind of fun to get to do something that was had a very different motive in terms of what the droid was for.
You must be careful.
So the amount of time also devoted to Leia's hairstyles was pretty significant in the show. And so there was a great deal of conversation about how her hairstyles would, we didn't want to obviously do the Carrie Fisher styles because that's sort of the more adult version. And so we were trying to show the development of how she eventually would get there, and also use Simone, her mom, Brea, to show also her role model, both in, as a person, as a woman, and also in costuming. So him leaving this cave, we made a very deliberate choice, obviously, to not have him in the same home that he's in by the time he gets to A New Hope. And that was for many reasons. One is that this was much closer, where he's living right now is much closer to Anchorhead. And so we felt at this stage he would want to be very close to the boy, and he'd be sitting there being very overprotective and wanting to watch. And so he's much more engaged and close. So he wouldn't want to be as far and be, tucked away in the Youngland Waste as he is later. And also that there's a transience to this, that it's almost like he's living like a monk, that, he had just sort of taken this up and everything was about just watching over the boy. And so in leaving this place, in large part, it was about making the decision that he will let go and he's not just going to be sort of overprotective and sitting there waiting and watching every moment, and put some faith and some trust in the future. So the EOP was actually a camel named Silas, and Ewan and Silas spent a lot of time together, a lot of time in the desert together. And Ewan took a great liking to the camel. I think at one point he even considered taking him home. And then I think he found out how long camels live and thought better of that, because camels can live up to 50 years in captivity. So it would have been a very long relationship with Silas. But it really does make a difference, and it's kind of amazing having like an animal like a camel to really ride rather than trying to do something on green screen.
And I will. You were right.
So this also, just from a costume perspective, and I'm sure there's people that are recognizing the mythos statue and a lot of the details there, is that I worked very closely with Satirat, who was our wonderful costume designer, and he's obviously a Jedi in hiding. And so, couldn't have him running around in Jedi clothes and a lot of this reflection. So we knew this was the end of the journey of taking him to this outfit and to this costume, that he was starting to now move into where he would eventually go with Alec Guinness. So this moment is something that, we knew we had to have a hello there in the show, and how many times we did it or where we put it was something that was discussed at length. So we saved it. We saved it for this moment because we thought it would be the most profound. And there were many iterations of the script that had hello there in many other places, and it always works, but we ended up sort of just sticking with this one because we thought it was the most significant. So now this is Ewan starting to head off to the Youngland Wastes, which is the step towards where Alec Guinness, where we're going to pick him up in A New Hope. So we were incredibly fortunate, obviously, to have Liam come back. And then also when we shot this, it was, one of the things that was most special about shooting this show is that, you're reuniting these actors and these characters for the first time in many years. That, they'd spent all this time shooting the prequels together and then come back and, reprise these roles. But then they also have this bond. It's pretty amazing to watch.
Beginning to think you'd never come.
I was always here, Obi-Wan.
So I think this for us was, this was significant because so much of the show had been about Obi-Wan trying to let go and process the guilt and the PTSD and everything that had come out of the Anakin relationship. And throughout the whole show, obviously, we've been developing that, he wasn't able to do what Yoda had told him he would be able to do, which is commune with Liam's character, with Qui-Gon. That, for him, is what will be the most significant, is having his master back in his life. And so that is episode 6. And that in large part was, a good 3 years of my life trying to get to that episode. I think it was definitely the most gratifying to shoot. And it was, it's always amazing to finally get your characters to be able to resolve their arcs and pull together all the storylines. But, I think one of the biggest things for me is just this cast and having them all come together in this episode and being able to, tie everything up. It was very special. And it was very satisfying. I felt like we'd been going through a lot to try to finally get to this moment. So thanks so much for watching. And that was episode 6 of Obi-Wan Kenobi.